A Fox News alert, Hurricane Florence now less than 2 days away from making landfall in the Carolinas. Experts are warning of a potentially devastating, life-threatening effect from the storm. Our chief meteorologist here at Fox is, of course, Rick Reichmuth. He's been tracking it since the beginning. Rick, what's your assessment right now?
Yeah, this is going to be a really significant storm for us. I just want to kind of put it into perspective for you, size-wise. This is the size of Sandy. It had tropical storm force winds that went out 1,000 miles. That is the size of Katrina. We know the damage that Katrina caused across parts of the central Gulf there. Now take a look at Florence. It's almost pretty much exactly the size of Katrina, 390 miles across for your tropical storm force winds. And the center of the storm, the winds have decreased a little bit today, down to 150 miles an hour, which is still a Category 3 storm. That just means the strongest storm, but the strongest winds, the hurricane force winds, extend out about 140 miles from the center of it. So we're talking about really strong winds that are going towards the shore. By tomorrow morning, we'll have tropical storm force winds. By the afternoon, we should have hurricane force winds. And then we're expecting to see it hang out on the shore here, Tucker. That's our big problem. Probably a good 48 hours of it right here on the shore, meaning the battering wind and waves and the prolonged period of rain. It's going to bring some spots potentially up to 40 inches of rain by the time this is done.
4-0?
4-0. 4-0.
Disaster. Rick Reichmuth, thank you for that. Really interesting and necessary. That's about it for us tonight. We're going to be back tomorrow night and the next night and the next night because a lot is going on and we're going to cover it because it matters. So come back to the show that's the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, and groupthink. But don't imagine that your night is over. You're probably picking up the remote and thinking, I'm going to bed. I'm going to have a beer. Do not, for two reasons. One, big breaking news night. The storm is coming, a lot going on in politics, but mostly Sean Hannity is right now. And you're not going to want to miss that live from New York.
Getting a beer and taking... No, we got a big news night.
I'm telling people, stay tuned.
Wow, what a way to sell it. Don't get your beer now. Wait till Ingram comes on at 10. What is that? Get your beer before Tucker. All right. Have a great night. Great show tonight.
Thank you, Sean.
Welcome to Hannity. A lot going on tonight. Hurricane Florence, you see it. It is on a collision course with North and South Carolina. If you are in the evacuation zone, please get out while you still can. And sadly, not everybody's taking the hurricane seriously. Take, for example, we got the editorial board, believe it or not, of the Washington Post. I'm not making this up, floating an insane conspiracy theory that President Trump is responsible for the storm. This is not fake news. This is literally Trump sickness derangement syndrome at a psychotic level. We'll show you the actual article. And frankly, it should embarrass all these so-called journalists that claim they have so much integrity. Also tonight, a huge dump of more struck page texts. We have them. And now we have even more evidence. It's now incontrovertible of what is illicit, politically motivated, anti-Trump, deep state leaking, CIA, FBI, DOJ, and, from the Director of National Intelligence. They're all included in this, conspiring against Trump not to get elected and then, of course, to stop him after he was elected. Now, remember what Chuck Schumer said? The intel community will get you 6 ways from Sunday. I hate to say it, I think he's right. And Breitbart has obtained footage of tech giant Google and their first company-wide meeting after the 2016 presidential election. All our fears have been confirmed. The people of Google detest the president you elected and everybody who voted for them. You're going to see this video for yourself. We're now also 55 days away from one of the most important midterms in your life. We will show you how the tactics of the left are beyond out of control, full of lies, and we do have a lot of good news for Republicans and information they should be using to win in 55 days. All right, sit tight, buckle up. It's time for tonight's breaking news, multi-pronged opening monologue. All right, it is now a full-blown psychosis. It is a psychological, level of unhingement I've never seen. Trump derangement syndrome, out of control. Remember, if your dog bites, if the bee stings, if the baby cries and you're feeling sad, it's all President Trump's fault. If he literally cures cancer, they will never give him credit in the media. Now, according to the editorial board of the New York Times, Hurricane Florence is also President Trump's fault. I'm not making this up. Look at the headline on your screen. Another hurricane is about to batter our coast. Trump is complicit. It's a Washington Post, by the way, not the New York Times. Believe it or not, that headline, it's not just clickbait. The Washington Post actually laid out a case in the editorial for why President Trump is responsible for bad weather. Look at this quote. When it comes to extreme weather, Mr. Trump is complicit. He plays down humans' roles in increasing the risks, and he continues to dismantle efforts to address those risks. Not only is the claim totally absurd, it's also factually wrong, not that they really care. The American Enterprise Institute.org, AEI.org, they put out in President Trump's first year in office, the U.S. reduced CO2 emissions more than any other country in the world. So Trump derangement syndrome is now reached a new height. These people are just downright sick in their obsession to hate the president. The slogan from the Washington Post is, democracy dies in darkness. Sadly, the final nail in the coffin for democracy, journalism, if you will, is the kind of blinding anti-Trump hatred that is on display from them and all their friends in the media almost every day. Now, maybe instead of blaming President Trump for bad weather and a hurricane, maybe the mainstream media could focus on the biggest abuse of power scandal in our history. And thanks tonight to the former FBI lovebirds, Page and Strzok, we have even more evidence that your government was leaking sensitive information, to destroy Trump from the get-go. First, to prevent him from becoming president, then to destroy his presidency. We showed you earlier this week the newly uncovered text messages revealing a 2017 media link strategy with the FBI coordinating with the DOJ. Sarah Carter also discovering that Strzok and Page were working on a Russian interference op-ed in the lead up to the 2016 election. So there was leaking not only by the FBI and the DOJ before the election, again, to prevent Trump from winning, after the election to destroy a duly elected president of you, the people. Now, Sarah Carter has obtained even more new texts from Strzok detailing his cozy relationship, with the New York Times and one of its reporters, Mike Schmidt. April 14, 2017, Strzok texting, quote, also, apparently the Times is angry with us about the Washington Post scoop, an earlier discussion that we had about the Schmidt piece that had so many inaccuracies. Too much to detail here, but I told Mike, redacted, and Andy, they need to understand we were absolutely dealing in good faith with them. Strzok then follows up that text with, quote, the FISA one coupled with the Guardian piece from yesterday. The FISA one. That's right. Peter Strzok was helping the New York Times with a story on the supposedly top secret FISA court. This is beyond bad. Supposedly, he's running the investigation. What does it say about the New York Times? What does it say about the Washington Post? All you need is one anti-Trump official to hand them propaganda, misinformation, distorted lies from a known Trump hater at this point, blow it up, act as though it's gospel truth. That's the paper of record. Where are the corrections? When are they coming? Don't hold your breath. Now, we did reach out to the DOJ, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Strzok and Page for comment. We've yet to get a response. But tonight we have brand new, never before seen text messages. And now appears that on top of, the Director of National Intelligence, the FBI and DOJ colluding in all this and leaking to the press, seems like the CIA, they too were involved in the same kind of illicit leaking. And yeah, we're talking about you, Mr. Sanctimony, John Brennan. FoxNews.com just obtained brand new texts showing that some officials were, quote, leaking like mad in the lead up to the FBI's Russia probe. Why? To influence public opinion. Take a look at this exchange. This is just after the president got elected, December 15th, 2016. There they are again, Lisa Page texting Strzok, quote, remind me to tell you tomorrow about the Times doing a story about the RNC hacks. Strzok responding, quote, and more than they already did? I told you that Quinn told me that they're pulling all the stops out on some story. He then followed up, quote, think our sisters have begun leaking like mad, scorned and worried and political. They're kicking into overdrive. According to reporting from our own Catherine Herridge, the sisters that they're referring to, that Strzok mentioned, well, that likely is the CIA. That would be John Brennan and Barack Obama's CIA. Less than a month after that exchange, the New York Times published a story about RNC hacks. And on the very same day, BuzzFeed published the Steele dossier, filled with Russian lies that Hillary paid for. So you have Strzok referring to the CIA, pulling out all the stops, saying the CIA is scorned and that they're political and they're leaking like mad. Less than a month later, the dossier becomes public. Now, is this the kind of politically motivated leaking from our most trusted government officials? Is that acceptable, John Brennan? I hate to say that Chuck Schumer's right, but if you go against the intelligence community, they'll get you 6 ways and Sunday. Why? Because the deep state, with the power that they have, intelligence-wise, it's like a house of cards. We're watching the whole scheme come tumbling down, revealing a level of corruption in your government that should make you sick and concerned. And as it turns out, high-ranking deep state officials, they weren't the only people rocked by the election of Donald Trump. Look at Breitbart.com. They obtained official video from inside a 2016 company-wide meeting at the tech giant Google. This was following Trump's win. Now, if you thought the good people of Google weren't biased and against all things Trump, well, this should make you think again. Let's take a look.
You know, let's face it, most people here are pretty upset and pretty sad for because of the election.
That was the first moment I really felt like we were going to lose. And it was this massive, like, kick in the gut that we were going to lose. And it was really painful.
We'll be very strong and vocal and, not just, from a press standpoint or a PR standpoint, but actually working hard behind the scenes to stand up for what's right.
I think it's worth being very vigilant and thinking about all these issues. What can we do to lead to maybe a better quality of governance, decision making, and so forth?
Is there anything positive you see from this election result?
Boy, that's a really tough one right now.
Google, fair and balanced, just like the New York Times and the Washington Post, and just like all those deep state actors. They responded to the release of that video in part, quote, nothing was said at that meeting or any other meeting to suggest that any political bias ever influences the way we build and operate our products. Of course, judging from what we just saw, well, we could show you an hour more of exactly the same thing. Virtually nobody, at least no one in a position of power at Google, wanted Donald Trump to win. Sounds like the CIA, FBI, DOJ, and, yeah, the Director of National Intelligence under Obama. According to what we just saw, many actively working against the president and against the candidate. And yet we're just supposed to believe them that there's no political bias and their bias doesn't impact any of Google's products. They literally held a funeral for our country at a company-wide meeting the day after Donald Trump won. We'll have more on that developing story throughout the hour. But first, all right, the countdown continues. It's all in your hands. This is where we, the people, have all the power. In 55 days, the Trump agenda will move full steam ahead or it will stop dead in its tracks. You get to decide. Now, some of these races will literally be decided by just a handful of votes. Let's take a look.
I'll just list you a bunch of races that are dead even. Arizona, Nevada, Tennessee, Montana, North Dakota, Missouri, Indiana, West Virginia, and Florida. All of them too close to call, and every one of them like a knife fight in an alley. I mean, just a brawl in every one of those places.
This is a time when your vote's going to matter. Do you care? Would you like the Trump agenda to continue? Do you like the records on the economy we keep talking about? A lot is on the line. A lot is at stake in this midterm election. 55 days away. Look at this map. If you're in one of these states, you literally will decide whether the Republicans run the Senate or Chuck Schumer, who says we can't impeach Trump soon enough, will run the Senate. You will decide if the Trump agenda moves through Congress. You will decide if originalists, constitutionalists, judges continue to be confirmed. And look very closely at this. If you live in one of these House districts, we'll run it really slow. You will decide whether or not the presidents will face impeachment, because that's what Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer have promised. Yeah, there's a lot in play here. It's that serious. You've heard it from all of them. They want to impeach the president. On my radio show earlier today, the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, said Republicans, they need a national election. they need to sign off on a unified agenda in order to secure victory. Now, we often talk about the 5 things the Democrats are going to do if they win. Let's see, impeach the president. They want their crumbs back. They want a tax increase. They want to keep Obamacare. That's worked out so well for so many of you, paying more, losing your doctors and losing your plans. Of course, they want to eliminate ICE. They want open borders. Well, what are the things Republicans ought to sign on to and promise to you if they get elected? Maybe one, it could be to follow through on the Trump agenda. Number 2, secure the border wall and fund the wall fully. Maybe they can support the president's choice for constitutionalists, originalists on the court so that you don't have people literally legislating from the bench, or vote to make the tax cuts permanent. Why shouldn't they be permanent? It's good for the economy. We'll have more information about that in a minute. Dismantle Obamacare, replace it with better plans, for example, that have more choices. Healthcare savings accounts give you more power. Healthcare cooperatives, like our good friend down in Wichita, Kansas, Dr. Josh Umber, Atlas MD, $50 a month, unlimited care, and he negotiates 95% reductions for any medicines you might need. Also, how about making America energy independent? We use all our resources available. We got more than the entire world combined. It'd be good for national security. It keeps us safe. It'll be good for the economy. It will create millions of high-paying career jobs for Americans, and in the process, wealth for Americans, so they can buy a nice car, a nice house, in a safe neighborhood, and send their kids to whatever they want to send them to. Republicans also, they've got to promote just how effective Donald Trump has been in the last 19 months. Just today, get this, look at this. We learned that U.S. median income rose to a record high during the president's first year in office. Poverty rate also fell during the president's first year. Millions fewer on food stamps, about 4 million fewer, 4 million new jobs. We have more manufacturing jobs than we've seen in 25 years. Jobs said Obama was never coming back. This country is literally booming under the president's leadership. And as that happens, good news is bad for the Democrats that want their power back, because we had 8 years of failure under their policies and under Obama's policies. And on top of that, guess what? America could still be even more prosperous. 14 states, record low unemployment for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, 65-year low for women in the workforce, youth unemployment, 55-year low. On top of this, watch all the left. They're getting unhinged. They are desperate. You got a guy in California actually trying to stab a GOP congressional candidate at his campaign stand. Police in Washington, D.C. investigating a threat to commit a mass shooting at a Make America Great event in Trump International Hotel. A Wyoming GOP office was set on fire less than 2 days after it opened. Senator Susan Collins, she's received over 3,000 coat hangers as she prepares to vote in the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh, and her staff has reportedly been receiving vulgar and threatening phone calls and promises to fund any opponents she may have. Not a good climate for people that support Trump. The rhetoric on the left, I don't blame those people, but certainly it's having an impact on those that have a tendency to be crazy. Now, before something horrible happens, maybe they should stop telling people on the left to be getting in people's faces and chasing Pam Bondi and Sarah Sanders and her kids and Secretary Nielsen out of restaurants. Joining us now with our top story, Fox News contributor Sarah Carter, investigative reporter, the author of the #1 New York Times bestseller, The Russian Hoax, The Illicit Scheme to Clear Hillary Clinton, Frame Donald Trump, Fox News legal analyst Greg Jarrett. Sarah, let's start with these new text messages. This is 3 days in a row now. Now it starts off with they're going to have a big media strategy. That was the first thing. And let's get into where we are today with the Washington Post and New York Times.
Well, I think this is the smoking gun that the FBI, particularly Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, and possibly Andrew McCabe, the former deputy director of the FBI, were leaking information to the media about none other than Carter Page. In April 2017, Sean, we have information in these text messages that they specifically state that the New York Times is upset with the scoop that was given to the Washington Post. Well, on April 14th or April 11th is when the Washington Post actually published a story confirming that there was a FISA warrant on Carter Page. I think about this, Sean. They were actually confirming a secret warrant to spy on an American citizen publicly with a newspaper. If all of this pans out to be true, these are, in their own words, these are text messages from Peter Strzok to Lisa Page, basically confirming that the FBI leaked information to the Washington Post. I spoke with Carter Page. He again said this is the biggest charade he's ever seen. Today he is just dumbfounded at the fact that they would go this far, but it didn't surprise him.
Yeah, Greg Jarrett, let's get into this. If you really break it down, all the evidence we have here, let's see, the FBI, DOJ leaking. Now we know the CIA is leaking. Where did the dossier leak come from? Don't we believe that came from the Director of National Intelligence at the time?
He
all
leaked
Obama
it, he
officials.
leaked it to the media, but the instigator was John Brennan, CIA director.
So let's talk about what it means.
When powerful forces in government abuse their trust to subvert the legal process, and when the media is complicit by condoning corrupt behavior and failing deliberately to tell the truth, democracy is threatened. And that's what happened here. The alphabet agencies of the intelligence community, the FBI, the DNI, the CIA, the Department of Justice, they were all involved in doing the same thing, leaking false information about Donald Trump and his associates to damage Trump and to, in the end, try to undo the election results. It is a cesspool of corruption and the people who did this, they need to be brought to justice if they committed crimes. And I can identify a variety of crimes, including abuse of power and obstruction of justice and perjury.
All right, we're not getting at this very quickly, though. I mean, we thought we had all the Strzok Page texts. There was a lot of talk earlier this week, Sarah, that in fact there might be unredacted material that included the 302s, which Steele and Broussard in particular. It might include the FISA warrant, more particularly the one that was signed, the last one by Rod Rosenstein. We talked about that conflict last night. Also, the Gang of Eight information that's never been released. And, you know, I read people and commenting, they're saying Hannity and Sarah Carter and Greg are full of crap. But in fact, this information does exist. It can be declassified and unredacted. Why hasn't it been?
I believe it will be. All the sources that I've spoken with say that the White House is reviewing this, that the president will declassify all of these documents. We have to understand right now, of course, the hurricane is barreling down. This is probably not the time to release those documents. I would assume that the president will do this as soon as possible, particularly with all this new information coming forward. Sean, those FISA documents are absolutely necessary. They need to be declassified. Even more importantly, I think along with those FISA documents, hey, look, they leaked it to the New York Times, to the Washington Post. Apparently, according to their own text messages, they didn't seem that concerned about the secrecy of the FISA document. If they were willing to give it out at the same time that James Comey was actually signing a FISA renewal, because during this time, James Comey himself signed the third FISA renewal, and then in June, Rod Rosenstein signed the last. So if they were okay with leaking this to the Washington Post, we should be able to see those documents, as well as the dossier that was given to the Gang of Eight, which I have been told holds an enormous amount of exculpatory evidence that was withheld from the FIS court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance
So we
Court.
have all these the biggest players with the powerful tools of intelligence at their avail, you know, the CIA leaking like mad, Greg, then the dossier leak, then Strzok and Page, then Comey. McCabe is mentioned in these new text messages. He knew about it. What happens when you leak this kind of information to the press, and they're the people, in the case of Strzok and Page and others, involved in the investigation that is ongoing?
Well, if any of it involved grand jury information, that's a crime. It's also a crime called obstruction of justice. If you're using your government job to interfere in an otherwise legitimate investigation, and it's a crime to launch an illegitimate investigation to deprive people of their rights. All of those are crimes. And if those crimes were committed, these people ought to be indicted for it. And you've named a great many of them, and they're all in my book as well.
All right, thank you both. We'll have the latest on Hurricane Florence about to hit the Carolinas. More reaction to this breaking news. Congressman Mark Meadows, who got a lot of this new information, Jim Jordan, they'll join us as we continue tonight on Hannity.
real wild.
All right, here now with more reaction to these explosive, brand new, just released text messages between Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, Congressman Jim Jordan, Congressman Mark Meadows. All right, it all started 2 days ago with the media strategy, and drip by drip, we keep getting more and more of these text messages. What do we see, Congressman Meadows? It looks like the FBI, DOJ, now the CIA, leaking all this information before the election, after the election, all designed to destroy Trump. Some of them are involved in leading an investigation supposedly against them.
Well, obviously, today's new text messages would suggest that the media leak strategy was exactly what we surmised in the letter that we sent to Rod Rosenstein just a couple of days ago. I think, but the bigger context of this is that this is not the end of it. I can say the Department of Justice has been working with Jim and I to get us additional documents. And I can tell you, there are dozens of other documents that would support the fact that Peter Strzok and Lisa Page had ongoing relationships with multiple reporters, and that they were feeding them information to spin a narrative against this president. No, it's not even, it's not legal. It's against protocol. But the other thing is they are denying it, and we have the proof that would suggest otherwise. So, you know, a good reporting tonight on behalf of Catherine and Sarah with these text messages. But I can tell you this: we believe that all the documents need to be made available to the American people. Let them judge. We have nothing to hide. The president has nothing to hide. Let's get it out there.
Well, let's talk about that, Jim Jordan. Look, a lot of people, including me, are frustrated because we've been waiting and requesting, Congress has requested, and it's been denied again and again and again, and there's been constant obstruction. But specifically, there is something apparently on pages 10 through 12, 17 through 34 of the Rod Rosenstein, when the signature of the third FISA renewal, the fourth warrant altogether, 302s, which would get into more detail with Christopher Steele and Bruce Orr. They were trying to Steele was trying to feed his information, funnel it through Bruce Orr to Robert Mueller's group, which conflicts them, I think. Then, of course, you've got the Gang of Eight information. Then I think at some point we should get all the Strzok Page text messages and correspondence. When are we going to get this information? People are frustrated.
Hopefully soon. Transparency is a good thing. Here's what's so frustrating about the dossier was a big lie. So what they did is they said, this is a big lie. The more people we can get talking about the dossier, the more likely it is they'll believe the lie. So that's why they had this leak strategy to support a document that was the basis for everything. That's the big problem here. They took that document, the dossier, untrue document. They took it to the secret court and didn't tell the court important facts to get a warrant to spy on the other
you're saying
campaign.
It nicely. Didn't they purposely lie to the FISA court, purposely withhold pertinent information to the FISA court? Isn't that a fraud committed on a court?
Didn't tell them who paid for it. Didn't tell him the guy who wrote it, Christopher Steele, had a extreme bias against the president, said he was desperate to stop Trump, and didn't tell the court about Orr's involvement, both Bruce and Nellie Orr's involvement in production of the document. Didn't tell him. You and I go to court, Sean, we've talked about this before. Mark and I go to court. We got to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
If this is unredacted, what do you know or what do you suspect the American people will say? Why do people tell me? I've not seen them. Well, people, I asked them, what's it on a scale of 1 to 10? Everyone says a 10 or a 9 is the lowest number it's got.
Yeah, I think go ahead, Mark.
Go ahead, Jim. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I was just going to say, I think Matt Gaetz and some others said it best last week. It's probably what's not there. We'll probably see very clearly they didn't tell the court the things you and I just talked about, that if we were in front of court, we would have to tell them. So I think it'll be the omission, what was omitted from the FISA application, that'll be the big news. But those 302s are important too, because the pattern was every single time Bruce Orr communicated with Chris Steele and with Glenn Simpson, he immediately went to the FBI and reported on that conversation. I want to know what those reports contain. What all did he say to these key people who were the ones who paid for and put together the dossier in the first place?
Mark, where's Spartacus Cory Booker when we need him for revealing information?
Well, here's the thing is we do need to reveal this. We know that James Comey leaked. We know that Andrew McCabe leaked. We know that actually Peter Strzok and Lisa Page leaked. We also know that the reporters that they leaked to know that they leaked. And listen, we've got names. We've got actually reporters' names. I believe that journalism is alive and well, but at the same time, we've got to make sure that we get rid of this in the FBI and DOJ.
Are you
I will
confident?
say this.
I am told that there's exculpatory evidence in the 302s, Gang of Eight information, and in the unredacted FISA that they literally purposely withheld exculpatory evidence as it relates to Papadopoulos, Carter Page. Is that true?
Well, we've heard the same things. I can tell you, seeing some of the unclassified documents, there is more of the story that has not been shared with the FISA court and actually with the American people. The time is now. We've got to get it out there, and we're calling on the president, hopefully, to release those documents.
All right, gentlemen, thank you both for what you do. I know it's taken a lot of courage and work on both your parts. Thank you. When we come back, mandatory evacuations are in effect in the Carolinas. Elsewhere, Hurricane Florence barreling towards the coast. Rick Reichmuth, he has a live report, and much more straight ahead on this busy breaking news night. Tonight, I'm Hannity.
My administration is in close coordination with state and local authorities and FEMA. These are tremendous people also, as you know, has already placed extensive resources on the ground, including search and rescue experts, power restoration, and medical support. Residents in the path of these devastating storms should comply with all evacuation orders and other emergency instructions. Protection of life is the absolute highest priority, and that's what we're doing. It's called protection of life. So God bless everybody and be careful.
I talked to my White House sources, a few today, and they said that they have already pre-positioned trailers with food and water, medicine, supplies, baby formula, cots, blankets, and are ready for a lot of devastation. The president earlier today discussing the preparations for Hurricane Florence. The storm headed right towards the east coast of the United States and the Carolinas. Rick Reichmuth is in the Fox News Weather Center with more tonight. Every single meteorologist I've spoken to, watching your coverage all day, they're all saying the same thing. This is the real deal. This hurricane's going to hit. There's going to be a surge. It's going to slow down once it makes landfall, and it's actually going to hit and then begin to slowly move south from Myrtle Beach and elsewhere. How bad is it?
Yeah, the problem is it's going to be a really long duration event, and that's going to make all of the things that you're dealing with, the wind, the rain, the storm surge, all of it just lasts a lot longer, and that exacerbates all of the problems you're going to deal with. So it is very real. I just want to put this into perspective for you. This is how big Sandy was, at least as far as the tropical storm force winds extended out. It was 1,000 miles. Katrina, we know the damage that did, and the tropical storm force winds extended out 400 miles from the center of that. Florence now, we've got tropical storm force winds that are extending out 390 miles, so almost the same size as Katrina. And with all the damage that Katrina did, it came on shore as a Category 3, which is what Florence is now as well. Because it has been so strong for so long, earlier today, there was a wave height measured of 84 feet in the bottom right quadrant. The front right quadrant of the storm. All of that wave action is moving towards the shore, and tomorrow it's going to slow down a lot in its forward progression. Here's the ocean temperatures. It's got to go still over the Gulf Stream right there. That's where the warmest water is, so there's plenty of fuel there to at least maintain the Category 3 strength, and right now the forecast is it might come up just a little bit. Here's that problem you were mentioning, Sean. That position there is tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. There's Friday afternoon, there's Saturday afternoon. Somewhere in here, this isn't going to move much more than probably, say, 50 to 80 miles. And because of that, you're going to have maybe a 36-hour period where you've got hurricane force winds along the coast and storm surge that keeps on piling up. Go into Sunday and Monday, and finally this begins to go out of here. But because of this long duration event, we're going to be talking about a lot of spots, I should say, 5 to 10 inches of rain, and probably at the height we'll see a couple of areas, maybe 40 inches of rain. That's all water that gravity wants to pull it offshore and out into the ocean, but storm surge is going to be pushing all of the water toward the shore, 9 to 13 feet, probably at the highest point. All that water going going in. And because of that ongoing long period, we're probably talking about 2 days, maybe 5 tide cycles or so, high tide cycles, where we see that water pulling in, the water trying to get out. That's why we're so concerned about inland flooding here. And keep in mind, very mountainous terrain here across the southern Appalachians, and that water will cause lots of flooding as well. There's some spots also in North Carolina, including across parts of the Appalachians, as well as places like Wilmington, Sean, that are at their wettest that they've ever been from this summer. So the ground's already saturated, and that is before any of this water gets toward that area.
You think around Myrtle Beach, Wilmington, goes a little south, more towards Charleston, but also right up the East Coast, and you're saying that tropical force winds, rains, all the way up through the East Coast, 1,000 miles up until New York and beyond?
Well, I think probably eventually it pulls inland and then kind of goes up around the Ohio Valley and maybe exits out across parts of New England. So it's going to take a while before that happens, and it won't be nearly as bad when it gets up towards the north. The biggest problems certainly are going to be here across parts of the South, but we're not done with it in the South probably until Sunday. So that's why this is so concerning, so many days of this extreme weather.
All right, I hope everyone heeds the warning. This is the real deal. Rick Reithmuth in the Fox News Weather Center, thank you. And as Hurricane Florence barrels towards the East Coast, sadly, the left continues to try and politicize the storm. You can't make this up. Of course, we have one newspaper saying, the Washington Times, Trump is complicit with a hurricane. That's how sick it's gotten. Listen to this.
You want to know what I fear? It's the calamity because of the lack of coordination of the government with the National Guard and with local government, the lack of responsiveness and preparedness of this government, because the president, he wants to find out who is the one that wrote that op-ed piece about the chaos in the White House, because he wants the Justice Department. He is so consumed by the calamity that exists and the chaos that exists that he's not really prepared and focused, because he spends every weekend golfing instead of preparing.
You know, you can't, by the way, I'm so sorry to the Washington Times. I meant the Washington Post. There's a big difference. One's an actual paper. The Washington Times and the Washington Post is basically a propaganda newspaper for the left wing. I apologize. Joining us now with reaction, author of the book, Why We Fight, Fox News national security strategist, Dr. Gorka, author of The Geraldo Show, Fox News correspondent at large, Geraldo Rivera, for the Washington Post to say complicit and then go on to say, you know, further that when it comes to extreme weather, Trump is complicit. He plays down humans' role in increasing the risk. He continues to dismantle efforts to address those risks. Is Donald Trump, Donald J. Trump, our president, complicit because we have a hurricane about to hit the Carolinas? Geraldo Rivera.
Well, Sean, I think that he is indeed complicit. I think he is also complicit in the stock market crash of 1929, not to mention the Manson murders. It's very clear that this man has his evil
By the way, you had an
claws, his
exclusive
tentacles in all
with
these
Charles
stories.
Manson.
You know, the good thing about that story is it is so patently ridiculous. It is so contemptuously false that it reveals an attitude toward this president that absolutely corroborates what I have said since before he took office. There has never been a president who has had a worse relationship with the press, where everything he does is construed in the most evil way possible, and where farcical notions like a president of less than 2 years being complicit in a storm barreling toward the Carolinas. This is a shameful attempt, really, to reveal what it does is reveal the dark heart of the Washington Post much more than anything about Donald Trump.
Well, you could add that to what we've been describing, and that is that if you have a bunch of Trump haters in the deep state, all they have to do is make a phone call, and it's going to get printed verbatim. Nobody ever questions their methods. There's no, I guess they can second source it, because they can say, well, talk to Lisa Page. And if it's Lisa Page leaking, talk to Peter Strzok. And then the New York Times, Washington Post just publish whatever lie, anti-Trump screed they want out there.
It is so deep, this hatred of the president. It is really scary. We have had political division. Richard Nixon was an extremely unpopular president. I submit to you that Donald Trump is getting a worse ride by the press than even Richard Nixon.
I don't think anybody.
It's really sad.
Dr. Gorka.
Sean, there's a funny aspect to this story, and then there's a serious side. The funny thing is, I mean, this is the editorial board. This isn't one op-ed writer. This is the editorial board of the Washington Post that have just made Donald Trump Poseidon. He is so powerful that he is now responsible for hurricanes. I mean, it's the average American looks at that and they just laugh. I mean, they have made themselves a laughing stock, and this is why fake news is real. But on the serious side, they don't believe what I know, what Geraldo knows, what you know, Sean. Donald Trump cares about one thing above all else: the safety of all Americans, especially those who are in the path of this hurricane. What the Washington Post did today, it's not journalism, Sean.
It is going to be devastating. If you're in these coastal areas, please, I don't say it often, pay your taxes and listen to your government officials here. There's going to be massive damage. There's going to be a risk to human life. Be careful. But no one person is complicit in creating a hurricane. Can't believe we're reporting it, but they did. All right, if you think that's bad, thank you both. The View's Joyless Behar saying, God forbid President Trump lives another 20 years. Whew. We got the tape. Reaction from Pam Bondi, Monica Crowley, as this breaking news night continues. Out in San Francisco, Republican congressional candidate. Guy goes after him with a switchblade after saying horrible things about Republicans. And then I think of the rhetoric of Cory Booker, Maxine Waters, some other people, get in their faces, you know, encouraging what has happened to Sarah Sanders and her family and Secretary Nielsen and you. You know, do you connect the rhetoric with the actions of a few maniacs?
Well, it's this groupthink is so dangerous, and that's what they promote, and that's what they promoted that entire segment. You know, and this was a perfect time for them to put aside their absolute hatred and disdain for our president and focus on a hurricane like you just did, Sean, a hurricane that is about to hit our coast.
He's complicit in creating the hurricane. Donald Trump is right up there. He tells God, I want a hurricane, and God and he combined, you know, and made a hurricane. He has the forces of nature on his side.
And being from a peninsula state and dealing with hurricanes my entire life, and as Attorney General, I know when Irma hit, when hurricanes have been, Matthew, have been towards Florida, President Trump was in constant contact with us, making sure we were okay, making sure everything was good in our state. And that's what he's doing now with the rest of our country.
And it was handled
Hurricane
beautifully
Florence.
with Florida. Yeah. And even though, look, it was horrible, the loss of life. 2 hurricanes back to back in Puerto Rico. Money doesn't solve the issues, but billions of dollars were spent in Puerto Rico, and the infrastructure to begin with was horrific, Monica. We've got to try and build up infrastructure, obviously, ahead of time in cases like that.
Well, that's right, Sean, and you'll recall that candidate Trump campaigned very extensively on infrastructure and rebuilding sort of the internal structure of America. You know, watching that Joy Behar clip calls to mind Madonna saying she wanted to blow up the White House early on. You know, you had just a Broadway star saying, you know, where's John Wilkes Booth when we need him? Kathy Griffin holding up the bloody Trump head, and now Joy Behar wishing him dead. This is where we are in this country, where you have an extremely deep-seated pathology of hatred. And
are you saying you don't believe the president's complicit in creating hurricanes? Are you really going to stand by that position tonight?
It is a deep-seated pathology, Sean, and it comes from the fact that Hollywood, the news media, academia, they have lost control of steering the national narrative, and it's causing tremendous frustration.
About Obama, Pam.
Sean, they spent 8 minutes trashing the president, trashing him, calling him names. And what did President Obama do any differently during hurricanes? It's a natural disaster that hits our country. And President Trump has been extremely involved. Exactly.
If it was said about Obama, Monica, quick.
Oh, well, you wouldn't hear the end of it, Sean. I mean, that person would be ostracized from society forever.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Thank you both.
Right.
When we come back, actor Jon Voight gives a very emotional reaction when talking about President Trump in an interview with the Great One. We've got that video for you straight ahead. Out in San Francisco, Republican congressional candidate, guy goes after him with a switchblade after saying horrible things about Republicans. And then I think of the rhetoric of Cory Booker, Maxine Waters, some other people, get in their faces, you know, encouraging what has happened to Sarah Sanders and her family and Secretary Nielsen and you. You know, do you connect the rhetoric with the actions of a few maniacs?
Well, it's this groupthink is so dangerous, and that's what they promote, and that's what they promoted that entire segment. You know, and this was a perfect time for them to put aside their absolute hatred and disdain for our president and focus on a hurricane like you just did, Sean, a hurricane that is about to hit our coast.
He's complicit in creating the hurricane. Donald Trump is right up there. He tells God, I want a hurricane, and God and he combined, you know, and made a hurricane. He has the forces of nature on his side.
And being from a peninsula state and dealing with hurricanes my entire life, and as Attorney General, I know when Irma hit, when hurricanes have been, Matthew, have been towards Florida, President Trump was in constant contact with us, making sure we were okay, making sure everything was good in our state. And that's what he's doing now with the rest of our country.
And it was handled
with
beautifully with Florida. Yeah. And even though, look, it was horrible, the loss of life. 2 hurricanes back to back in Puerto Rico. Money doesn't solve the issues, but billions of dollars were spent in Puerto Rico, and the infrastructure to begin with was horrific, Monica. We've got to try and build up infrastructure, obviously, ahead of time in cases like that.
Well, that's right, Sean, and you'll recall that candidate Trump campaigned very extensively on infrastructure and rebuilding sort of the internal structure of America. You know, watching that Joy Behar clip calls to mind Madonna saying she wanted to blow up the White House early on. You know, you had just a Broadway star saying, you know, where's John Wilkes Booth when we need him? Kathy Griffin holding up the bloody Trump head, and now Joy Behar wishing him dead. This is where we are in this country, where you have an extremely deep-seated pathology of hatred. And
are you saying you don't believe the president's complicit in creating hurricanes? Are you really going to stand by that position tonight?
It is a deep-seated pathology, Sean, and it comes from the fact that Hollywood, the news media, academia, they have lost control of steering the national narrative, and it's causing tremendous frustration.
About Obama, Pam.
Sean, they spent 8 minutes trashing the president, trashing him, calling him names. And what did President Obama do any differently during hurricanes? It's a natural disaster that hits our country, and President Trump has been extremely involved. Exactly.
If it was said about Obama, Monica, quick.
Oh, well, you wouldn't hear the end of it, Sean. I mean, that person would be ostracized from society forever.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Thank you both.
Right.
When we come back, actor Jon Voight gives a very emotional reaction when talking about President Trump in an interview with the Great One. We've got that video for you straight ahead.